Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the OK Grognard Show. It is Saturday, November 14th, 2020, 10 a.m. Central, or just after, in beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Well, it's Saturday, GM Review Day, and we're going to look at the fourth tome ever written for Dungeons and Dragons. Of course, the three little booklets came out in the box first, and then they expanded it with this. For those of you who are Greyhawk aficionados, this could, if you're looking back at this without prior knowledge, this baby could be a little deceiving in that Greyhawk was Gary Gygax's setting as Blackmore. The next supplement was Dave Arneson's, but with the Temple of the Frog in Blackmore, I think there's more setting material, proper, if you will, in Blackmore than there is in Greyhawk. But that is not to say there is not a good deal of material. And here is something. If you want, you can go to DriveThruRPG and pick up. I'm not going to put a link in the show notes. It's easy enough to find. Just go to DriveThruRPG and type in Greyhawk. It'll pop right up. They have a new cover, as they have made some revisions. Not revisions necessarily. They cleaned it up. You won't find hobbits mentioned in the revised version. Everything will be halflings where it comes up. Something that is always here. Let's do this. Let's pop back over to here. There we go. Put me on the sound only while I take 1 second. Excuse me for a moment. Okay, I think I got that sorted. This is the cover you'll see from the new version, if you will. I kind of glanced through it, except for things like, just cleaning up the text and different cover, because there's some copyright issues in regard to the original artists. They've had to adjust some of the illustrations. I don't think there's a whole lot of difference if you pick this up for $5 as a PDF. And isn't that a deal? They have the classic Bell Lizard Man logo-esque. Gary and Rob, Alan and Mike, good old Mike. What an irascible bastard. Jeff Key for suggestions. Greg Bell illustrations. There you go. We get into those sorts of things. So, Greyhawk here, as you can see by this, is essentially an expansion of each of the three booklets from the original set of Dungeons and Dragons. If you're looking for this to be, oh, it's the Greyhawk setting. I'll just go grab this and I can use it with OD&D. It's not that. What you will find in these pages is a little bit of underworld and wilderness stuff. It's tricks and traps, monster tricks, combination monsters at the end. Just a few pages. You will find a big chunk of men and magic stuff. And if you look at this in terms relative to later editions, you're basically looking at Men in Magic as if it's player's handbook material, Monster and Treasure as if it's monster manual material, and Underworld and Wilderness Adventures as if it's either DMG material or setting source book material, depending on which chunk you're looking at. It's interesting if also you have played and more particularly run Dungeons and Dragons. In any edition, you will see things in here that harken to the earliest proto versions of various things that have become staples in Dungeons and Dragons. One thing that I think I should mention, because I think it bears mentioning, there's a nice forward by Gary from the 1st of February, 1975. So we're about 2 months away from that being 45 years old. D&D, I think generally speaking, people have settled on late January as the anniversary of the original publication of Dungeons and Dragons. It's a little unclear. Since it's unclear, and people like to use their best guess, I don't think it's a big deal for me to say that I think we need to celebrate it on the 26th of January. It bookends 2 halves of the year nicely because July 26th. Oh, is it 27th? Wait a minute. Oh, boy, I'm really... Where's my 27th? So if you do January 27th and call that the first publication of the original 3 booklets, then in July 27th, when you get to Gary Gygax's day, because was his birthday, the anniversary of his birth, it still is that, then, you're 6 months either side of it, which I think makes it pretty convenient. And I was going to say memorable, but then I just didn't quite get it, did I? So, in any event, that having been 74, it'll be 47 years this January. 3 more years until the 50th anniversary of D&D. That is going to be a good time, I think. I'm looking forward to it. So we got this forward. We'll move on. Men in Magic. Let's do a quick rundown here. Characters, determination of abilities, non-player characters. That's almost DMG material, right? Levels and number of experience, points necessary to attain them, statistics regarding classes, guidelines for rewarding experience. Some of this isn't really player's handbook. It would be DMG material today, so perhaps I was being too broad saying that this is more along those lines. Spells, you've got Monster and Treasures. You put treasure stuff in there. That's kind of DMG material. So some of this stuff gets filtered out, if only because you want to keep it a little further away from the eyes of players. Looking further into this, 4 main classes now with the publication of Greyhawk, and a subclass, Fighting Men, includes Paladins. Magic users, clerics, we're expecting those 3 thieves. Thieves? What about these thieves? Well, hang on, we got to talk about Fighting Men first, they say. And they jump into discussing Fighting Men just a little bit. Lawful fighters can become paladins. That was higher up on the list, so let's get that out of the way. Tells you where to look for more information. Then it gets into thieves. Pretty straightforward. They're either neutral or chaotic. Remember, lawful, neutral, and chaos. No good and evil yet in Dungeons and Dragons. Restricting them to leather, cannot employ shields. We already learned this. If we're reaching back, we know about that sort of thing. Cannot learn spells. But read scrolls at high level. Okay, we're there still. How about these thief abilities? Listen how they're just a little bit different from what we've come to know and love. Open locks by picking or foiling magical closures. Magical closures. Open locks by picking or foiling magical closures. So finding a way through magical locked or closed doors. Interesting. Can I bypass a hold portal based on what that says there? Remove small trap devices such as poison needles. Pits, blocks, am I finding them? Can I find these traps? Am I just removing them? Do I have to know about them? There you go. A little bit different, right? Listen for noise behind closed doors. So when you're looking through these, you got to be thinking, hey, this stuff, this is what they first thought these things should be. Which is to say, if they express them well enough, these are the basis for why we create each of these abilities. If we've expanded on them or added to them or rewrote them to be more, to clarify them, okay, fair enough. But at their heart, this is what they were meant to be, right? So opening locks by picking or foiling magical closures is a little more broad than what it's become. A little tougher to do magical things, right? Remove small trap devices such as poison needles. Do I know how to deal with something larger like a pit trap? What about a falling block trap that is triggered by a tripwire? Is that a small device, the tripwire? Even though the block, a 10-foot cube of stone, for instance, that drops out of the ceiling, that's not a small device. Listen for noise behind closed doors. Straightforward. Move with great stealth. Okay. Now, is that silently? Is it close to silently? Are we saying it's in the ballpark? It's silent enough? It's silent versus the person we're trying to be stealthy against, but maybe not others? A lot of questions in the way that's written there. Filch items and pickpockets. So, it's more sleight of hand. It's not just picking of pockets. It's snatching something off a counter in a store, in a general store when the clerk has their back turned, right? Filling up your pockets with candy at the candy store when you get them to look the other way. Hide in shadows. Not much to argue about there. Strike silently from behind. Now that has gone through some changes over the years. But do you have to be silent to get there to make the strike? And when you do strike silently from behind, is there some benefit to that? We'll get to that. Climb nearly sheer surfaces, upwards or downwards. Not side to side? What? What? Okay. I think we mean all over the place, really. But obviously, there's a lot to unpack here. Now, here's where we get into something that has always been kind of a odd occurrence within the OSR, usually with younger players who started later than 74, sometimes with players who didn't start until a decade or more later. Furthermore, it says, dwarves, elves, halflings, half-elves, and halflings may be thieves, and in this class there will be no limit to their continuing to advance to the highest levels. So, basic D&D aficionados sometimes like to lump all that came after that isn't advanced, and maybe that first starter set, box set, all that came after on that side of the two avenues that D&D took after original D&D, and lump it together with original D&D and call all of that classic D&D. And one of the biggest things they tout as being evidence that that was the way that it should be lumped together is races as class. Dwarves, elves are automatically of a certain class. Well, my contention, and I think it's pretty clear from what we see in Greyhawk, which becomes clarification of earlier work, is that it was just shorthand. It was never meant that just because elves could only become this or that didn't mean that they were automatically this or that. And here we see that that has changed. All of these races may be thieves. And in this class, there will be no limit to their continuing to advance to the highest levels. So everything that came before, well, they were choosing a class or classes. We all know the classic magic user, elf magic user fighter, or fighter magic user, right? And here we see that they are just assuming that we understood that by saying they may be thieves and that they have level limits. Thieves of 3rd level and above are able to read most languages. We get into that. Thieves of the 10th level and above are able to understand magical writings. So they can cast from scrolls, and there's a chance of failure. By striking silently from behind, we're looking at this. The thief gains 2 advantages. First, he increases the chance to hit by 20%. 4 plus 4 on his die. Secondly, he does double damage when he so attacks, with like additional damage for every 4 levels he has attained. Thus, a thief of 4th level attack from behind would do twice the damage indicated by the die. 5th through 8th, he would do thrice the damage. 4 times, 9th through 12th, so on and so forth. But notice in this version, striking silently from behind. He has to be silent, and I believe the suggestion is that the target is unaware. Why else would silence matter? So he needs all of that. First edition, it's been suggested, based on how it is written, that you can attack, you can backstab, and you can get the multiple damage. But additionally, if you're silent, you can get the plus to hit. That is one interpretation of that. But I believe this speaks to how that was meant to be read. In that, here's all that stuff, and then, but they put it backwards. They add in the plus to hit at the end of the description when it comes to backstabbing. Well, that's almost something we could look at tomorrow. But I think we've just described it and covered it, so there you go. I think we're going to have to spend quite a bit of time on this supplement, reviewing it, interpreting it, discussing some of the changes. As you can see, the ability of the thief to climb is also a function of his level. There's a basic chance of 13%, much lower than in later editions. First level thief will slip and fall in climbing. With each higher level attained by the thief, this chance is reduced by 1%. 13% that he will fall and slip. Sorry, I'm just looking at that upside down. So an 87% chance of climbing, which is more in keeping with what later editions have. With each higher level attained by the thief, this chance is reduced by 1%, so that a 10th level thief has but a 4% chance of slipping, a 96% chance of climb. They don't get into any of the circumstantial modifiers. Is it super windy out? Is the surface wet? Any other crumbly? Is it crumbly? Other information regarding thieves will be found in appropriate sections of this booklet. So, we look over this thief, and I think we have some revelations there in regard to how this is essentially proto-advanced D&D. They talk about how races can advance as thieves and that they have level limits. They talk about this is not a race is tied inextricably to a class. So that's not really something that was done. That is an interpretation of original D&D that gets picked up in basic and moved forward in basic, expert, and so on. But not really intention here, it seems, because when we write up this thief class, it seems, and when it's described in here, there seem to be some clarifications as to how previous discussion of race and class should have been interpreted. Talk about dwarves here. Talk about elves. Talk about halflings. Not hobbits. Half-elves. All of that's pretty interesting material. We get into law, neutral, chaos. There's one of my favorites. Nasty, nasty carrion crawlers. Determination abilities. We get into percentage die rolls now for fighting men. Strength also aids the fighting man in his ability to score a hit upon the adversary and damage it. Not hyphened there, not hyphenated there. Still man, not fighter, which degenderizes it. Is that a word? Am I using that right? Fighters of exceptional strength are now far more formidable opponents. Of course, 1 through 50 still means the same as 18. Plus 2, plus 3, plus 500 weight allowed, 1 to 5 doors. Intelligence, we get the breakdown as to knowing spells and minimum and maximum that you're able to know. 17 and 18. Oh, we can know them all. That's pretty amazing, huh? Ability scores. Constitution gets a little tweakage there, although it's not 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 1, 1 is your best, 2, and 3. These survivability of resurrection and of spells, probability of surviving spells, system shock. This became, right? Which is like if you get turned to stone and back, is it such a shock to your system that you just can't survive it? So that starts to sink in with Greyhawk. Then we get into non-player characters. I'll tell you what, we're about done for the day. I think we're going to make this an ongoing Saturday thing, looking at this, reviewing the sections of it, talking about how it fits in with first edition. It's almost a rules retrospective thing, but I like how this works with discussing GM takeaways on this, the kind of GM's perspective of whether this is worth picking up for someone who's coming at D&D from some other angle, whether it's worth having if you're just playing OD&D with the 3 booklets. If you're playing first edition, is it worth going back and picking this up and seeing what has changed? I think so far we've already seen some things that are at least interesting to know if you're a first edition DM. I think it's, of course, in original D&D you would have been called a referee. They hadn't picked up the Dungeon Master moniker yet and run with it. I think it's also worth noting that with all of the material that's in here, there'll be some stuff that has changed in later editions that you may consider changing back. Do we want to... for instance, I run backstabbing based on the way it is written in here. The idea that you have to be silent to get away with it. Because in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons combat, there is no facing, per se. There's a whole minute in a melee round, and you're supposed to be moving around and dancing back and forth and keeping potentially multiple opponents at bay, such that if you're aware of any attacker, part of what you're doing is fending them off from behind and in front. And, whether that means I'm hitting here, but then I'm swinging my sword behind me to keep somebody from getting a backstabbing. If you're aware of them, how do they get a clean, perfect shot in at a kidney or up through the ribs from the side up into the heart? Tricky to do when an opponent is not aware of you. All the more tricky if they are. Well, anyway, we're going to move on. We're going to shut her down for today. We'll pick this back up next week, I think. Could be ongoing for several weeks because there's a lot of material here. So let me say, thanks for coming out today. I appreciate it. It's very much appreciated. I will also say, come on back and see us again. 10 a.m. tomorrow and every day. Rules retrospective on Sunday. Weekly news and announcements on Monday. Cartography and world building Tuesday. Campaign discussion on Wednesday. GMing tips on Thursday. Building adventures on Friday. And back around to GM reviews on Saturday. If you're catching up with this on YouTube, thanks very much. Subscribe to the channel. Give us a thumbs up on videos that you watch and enjoy, and feel free to make comments if you have some constructive criticism or just want to give us a pat on the back. I appreciate it. This has been the OK Grognard Show from beautiful Lake Geneva in Wisconsin. Bye-bye.